just show up every day.
With the help of Hashem, we are learning Megila, Daf Hey. We left off on Daf Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. First, we're going to have a discussion whether we need to have the presence of a minyan for the reading of the Megillah. Is a minyan required? Is it at least ideal to pursue a minyan? As we will see the sugya up until the Mishnah. We're going to learn the second Mishnah in the Masechta that's going to define a large town versus a village. And yes, we already quoted that in the previous shiurim, the concept of asara batlanim, that a city that doesn't have 10 batlanim, literally meaning people that do nothing. We'll see what that means. They do a lot. They don't have a job. Their responsibility is to be in the Beis Medrash, but specifically, as we'll see today, we want for there to be 10 people in the shul. So when the times of prayers come, so minyan is called for 7 a.m., mincha ma'ariv is called for 4:45 p.m., right away there should be a minyan. That's the meaning of, and that's the purpose, the primary purpose of these asara batlanim. So if you is even a large city, but if it doesn't have asara batlanim that live locally, it's called a village, and therefore, as we'll see, they have the option, if needed, when needed, to advance the Megillah reading to the 11th, 12th, and the 13th. Now we're going to have a very enigmatic braisa. The braisa says these words, that chagiga, v'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin. Literally, that means that we could postpone the chagiga offering. We'll explain what that is. But then, and the time of the chagiga offering can also be postponed. Pasha, these words don't make sense. And we're going to have various approaches how to understand this braisa. On the Daf Hey Amud Beis, we're going to learn that Rebbe, right, the compiler of the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the leader of the Jewish people, wanted to completely postpone or take away the fast of Tisha B'Av in a year where you don't fast on Shabbos because Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbos. We never fast on Shabbos, so it's delayed or postponed until Sunday. Rebbe was of the opinion that since it's postponed, it should be that year fully postponed. Now, we did not follow that approach of Rebbe, but it's good to know what Rebbe held of. We're going to have the other big topic on Daf Hey Amud Beis will be whether one is permitted to work on Purim or not. Now, Purim is a rabbinic holiday. We have really two big rabbinic holidays, Chanukah and Purim. We are familiar with both of them, and we are allowed to work. So what we add is, on Chanukah, we add Hallel, and on Chanukah, we light the menorah. But you don't have the type of restrictions of working like we have on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Neither is that way on Purim. But as we will see, initially, there was a havamina to make Purim into a Yom Tov in which one may not work. It didn't pan out that way at the end. We're going to move from that into the bottom of Daf Hey, which will lead us already into tomorrow's Daf Vav regarding various cities in the Holy Land. The discussion will begin regarding Tveria. Is Tveria or was Tveria a walled city from the times of Yehoshua ben Nun? And once we are discussing Tveria, we're going to be quoting verses that mention names of various cities in Eretz Yisrael. There's a city called Hamas, there's a city called Rakas, there's a city called Keneres, and we're going to try to identify exactly which cities are those cities and much more. Again, let us start on Daf Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud, Amarav. First topic, minyan, no minyan. Says Rav, Megila Bizmana. When Megillah is read in its proper time, which means when you live in a city that's unwalled on the 14th, as we do today. If you live in a walled city from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, the right time is like in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, like in Shushan Abira, on the 15th. Says Rav, Koren Oisa B'Yachid, you read the Megillah without a minyan, even though there is a persuma nisa aspect connected to the reading of the Megillah, and to publicize the miracle. The concept of persuma nisa happens when you have a multitude of people. However, Rav holds, since everyone is reading it on that day, there is a persuma nisa. In other words, do you have 10 people in one room, or do you have 10 individual peoples in 10 different rooms? It's 10 people reading the Megillah. You got persuma nisa. It's only shaloi bizmana, it's only in those scenarios, as we began this tractate, that if you live in a village At times, you are allowed to advance, to anticipate the reading of the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. In other words, when you are reading it not in its correct time, there Rav says, Ba'asara, you have to get a minyan because no one else is reading it then. So to have the Persum and Isa, you have to have a minyan. So holds Rav. Rav Asi disagrees. Rav Asi Omar, Bein Bismana, Bein Shaloi Bismana, Ba'asara. You have to have a minyan. You always have to pursue a minyan. Very importantly, interprets Rashi the second opinion. We have to read this Rashi. Rav Asi Omar, guys, the fifth line from the top of the Amid. Bein Bismana, Bein Shaloi Bismana. Kaiches Rashi, what Rav Asi is saying is that mitzvah lachazoid achar asara. It's ideal. You should pursue, you should attempt to get a minyan because of Persum and Isa. Aval im loy ashkach asara. But what happens if you don't get a minyan? It's not that Rav Asi is saying is that you may not read it without a minyan. Loy amar Rav Asi de loy likri. Rav Asi didn't say that you can't read it without a minyan. She'ein isur kriyasa b'yachid. Just to make it clear, what Rav Asi is speaking about beyond Rav, that even when you're reading it bismana, it's ideal to read it with a minyan. In other words, what does Rav hold? Rav holds that when you are reading the Megillah on the right day, which is what we do nowadays in LA, right? We read it on the 14th. You don't even have to make an effort to get a minyan. I Persum and Isa. The fact that everyone is reading it on that day, even if they're reading it in different locations, that is the Persum and Isa. Now, even though Rav was, so to say, more lenient than Rav Asi, nevertheless, Hava Uvda v'chashli Rav lo had Rav Asi. Rav lechumra followed Rav Asi's opinion. This is so important to understand. You know, you have the law, you have the halacha, and then there is the beyond the letter of the law. No, it's just because Rav felt that halachically, when you read the Megillah bismana, you don't have to make an effort to get a minyan. That's halachically. But nevertheless, in practice, Rav held lechumra the way Rav Asi held me'ikar adin. And Rav always tried to get a minyan. I just want to say the fact that there was a story in which Rav made the effort to get a minyan. You know, people have this image that Rav, in the Beis Midrash of Rav, there were like thousands of people. If that would have been the case, Rav would never have had the opportunity to make an effort to get a minyan. It's like in the earlier years of the Rebbe. You know, it's just to know, you can be the biggest Tana, the biggest Tamaida. There were times that in your shtibel, like many people are familiar, we need a tenth. And when it came to the Megillah reading, Rav said, let's chap Chaim Yankel, let's get that guy to make a minyan. This is a question on Rav who holds that whenever Megillah is read not on its right time, the villagers, if they read it earlier, what does Rav say over there? There Rav says they must have a minyan. And listen to these words that Purim Shechaliyas bis Shabbos. This is before the calendar was fixed, as it was not yet fixed in the days of Rav. If Purim falls out on Shabbos, so the words that Rav said is Erev Shabbos Zmanam. Then the time is Erev Shabbos. Now we already learned the sugya that everyone agrees that we do not read the Megillah on Shabbos. The Megillah is also not pushed forward. It's not postponed. It's advanced. And Rav said the words that Erev Shabbos is manam. Now, what did Rav mean with those words? Erev Shabbos manam. No. These words cannot be interpreted literally that Erev Shabbos is the right time. Shabbos is the right time. So is it not that Rav meant to say Elalav Hachi Ka'amar that Shaloi Bismanam Kizmanam, that reading it on Friday has the same onus, has the same chiyuvim as reading it in the right time, which would mean that Mazmanam Afilu B'Yachad, Rav is the one that paskins that when you read the Megillah in the right time, by the letter of the law, you don't even have to make an effort to get a minyan. You can read it B'Yachad. Same thing, Yachid Rabim. So maybe doesn't Rav mean to say Af Shaloi B'Zmanam, even in the cases where Megillah is read Shaloi B'Zmanam, here the case would be not the villager, but Purim falls out on Shabbos in those days, and therefore you advance it to Friday. And when he said Bismanam, does he not mean to say that you also don't need to pursue a minyan? So there appears to be a stira, Rav and Rav. So the Gemara says, no, like you didn't understand this latter statement. Le'inyan mikra Megila, Rav holds with this statement that whenever Megillah is not read on its date, you have to pursue a minyan, including the case where Purim falls out on Shabbos and you have to advance it, even though you can argue everyone is advancing it, so there's Persuma Nisa. Theoretically, yeah, but loy plug. No, it's once we have this rule that whenever the Megillah is not read bismana, make sure you got a minyan, it applies here as well. The words that Raf said, Ella my erev Shabbos manam, we learned that in the previous sugya. There was a whole machlokes tanoim. Rav is trying to tell us that he doesn't paskin like Rebbe. And by the way, which is also the sheet of our Mishnah. If you remember, what does our Mishnah hold? That when Purim falls out on Shabbos, you don't go back to Friday, you go back to Thursday. You go back to Thursday because since the villagers read it Thursday, in any ways you're not reading it on the right time, to have less dates, for there to be less diversity, more people should be keeping the mitzvah on the same date. So Rav is saying, I don't paskin that way. Rebbe holds the Amar, since they are already pushed off their right time, they should already go back to the day of the gathering, the day of the assembly, which is Thursday. So that is what Rav is telling you. No. That if you have to take it away from Shabbos, only go back one day, don't go back 2 days. Erev Shabbos is the correct time, not Thursday. But as far as the minyan is concerned, Rav holds, if the Megillah is not read on the correct date, then you have to pursue a minyan. If the Megillah is read on the right date, then the way Rashi learns, you don't need to pursue a minyan. By the letter of the law, and Rav, so to say, l'chumra, l'fnim yishur sadin, still agrees that there's a concept of Roiv Mahadras Melach, even if you're not going to say it adds to the Persuma Nisa, but it does add also to the Persuma Nisa, and an effort is made, at least l'chumra, to make larger gatherings in which to read the Megillah. Good. New Mishnah. Now, Chavra, we already quoted some of this Mishnah in the Sugya up until here. Says the Mishnah, Ezu hi ir gedoyla. The definition of a large, unwalled city, large is not about how many people live in the city. It's amazing. Size means kol shiyesh ba asar batlanim. It's a city that can afford, or they make the effort, they have the priorities everyone can afford. It's about what are your priorities? To make sure that there are 10 Yidden that are in that city that are bottled from doing choil work. Their responsibility is to be in the base haknesses. Now, I know when we quoted this last time, we said to be koilel yungalite. That's secondary. Actually, today we'll see in the Gemara, the main purpose for Asara Batlanim is not to have people learning Torah the whole day, but it is to have people in the shul. So for whatever time the davening was called for, there should immediately be a minyan.
You don't need to send out WhatsApps.
And you don't have to send out WhatsApps because when the time of prayer comes, God comes to shul, awaiting our prayers. And what type of shame is there that we make God wait? So having Asara Batlanim guarantees that davening starts on time. That's what the Gemara says. So if a city that has that, that's called a big city. There's going to be a bracha to the city is going to grow. If a city doesn't have it, it's called a village. Pachus mikan, no matter how many people live there, harei ze kfar. Now, ironically, if it's a kfar, it means that they can advance the reading. And I want to add something. What did we learn in the last sugya? Why do we allow them to advance it? It's for them, we said, because since they are the ones that are in service of others. Now, let me flip it. There's different ways of looking at it. People in the Kefarim, since they are servicing the large cities, now the Mishnah is saying it's really not about numbers, but it is about numbers. It's about that people, a city that designates money to make sure you have in the base Midrash people the whole time available to davening right away. God is going to bless that city with a lot of money. And they won't have to be servicing others with Maimamaz, and others will service them. It's connected. And if they don't have Asara Batlanim, then there's going to be, God forbid, a diminution in their parnasa, and they're going to end up being in service to everyone around them. Since they'll be schwitzing so much, we have Rachmanas on them and we let them advance it in those scenarios. Now, Elu Amru, only in Purim do we say, as we say, that whenever the mitzvah cannot be done in its or on its ideal date, so you have to move it. The question is, do you move it backwards? Or let me say the word advance. The word advance is the opposite of backwards, but it means the same thing. Advancing, it means prior, And the Megillah is never postponed. However, says the Mishnah, there are other mitzvahs, and we're going to enumerate all of them, that whenever it cannot be done in its right time, you dafka go in the opposite direction. You don't advance, you dafka postpone. What are they? Avosman atse kohanim, and the Bach adds the words v'ha'am. We just learned this in Tainus, for those of us who learned Tainus, that there were 9 families that were rewarded. This is a Jewish reward. You gave tzedakah today, you know what your reward is going to be? Tomorrow you're going to give tzedakah again. No, since they gave the wood, so every year on that date, they gave tzedakah. Now, when they donated wood, they didn't only donate wood, they donated wood and a carbon. Now, what happens if that date was on Shabbos? Such a carbon cannot be brought on Shabbos, and even bringing the wood, carrying is prohibited. So they couldn't celebrate the actual carbon on their date. So what did they do? Did they go backwards or did they go forwards? They went forwards. Number 2, Tisha B'Av. This is something that we are familiar with. In the case, and this can happen nowadays, that Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. So we don't get away with the fast. The Rebbe wanted to completely undo the fast on such a kviyus. We fast, but we don't fast on Friday. We don't fast on Thursday. We fast on Sunday. By the way, which fast do we advance? Tainus Esther. We'll get to that later. Tisha B'Av is postponed. Chagiga on every Yom Tiv, the Jewish men were obligated to appear in the Beis HaMikdash, to see godliness and to be seen by God, so to say, and they have to bring with them 2 karbanis, a carbon oila, it's called an oilas re'iyah, and a carbon chagiga, shalmei chagiga. We're going to speak today about both of these karbanis. We learned it already about in the Sechtas Beitz, if I'm not mistaken. We have a machlekes b'Shamai and b'Silo. You know, can you bring these karbanis on Yom Tiv? Oila b'chral is not eaten. The Shalmei Chagiga is eaten, but you know, does that justify you bringing it on Yom Tiv? We're going to quote that machlekes.
Chagiga is not a shiur, right?
Chagiga is a shiur. Shalmei Chagiga is mamish biblical shiur. 2 karbanis. It's a shlamim and an oila. Well, good. That's the way it is. There's more details that I know you're grappling at, but it's a chiyuv. Now, if a person didn't bring it on that date, so the rule is they can bring it later. It's called the days of tashlumim, the days of payment. The days of tashlumim are never before. A person can never say, I can't bring it on the first day. Let me bring it erev. Can't do that. I know by Pesach we learned there was the Chagiga Yudala. That was something else. That was not connected to this. Hakeel, great example. Hakeel, the actual mitzvah of Hakeel is that on the year after Shemitah, now we're learning Tavshan Pei Beis, Tavshan Pei Gimel, during Chag HaSukkos, on the first day of Chol HaMoed. So we would gather actually right after Yom Tov, we would build platforms in Ezras Nashim to accommodate many, many people. And men, women, and children would gather there, and the Kohen, the Melech, would read big parts of Chumash Devarim. If that date fell out on a Shabbos, so like Rashi writes, you can't build on Shabbos. And since the mitzvah is to gather not only Anashim and Nashim, but also Taf, so a child under a certain age has to be carried, can't carry. So that gathering in which the Melech Yisrael reenacted Maimed Har Sinai could not be done. So again, do you do it prior or post? You do it post. You postpone it. And the Gemara is going to go through every single case. Final din in the Mishnah. Go back. Let's come back to Megillah. Even when the Megillah is advanced, is read earlier, but mutarim behesped ubetaines. That day, mamash, what we learned in the Gemara. So we already made it clear. What else is done while you read the Megillah? Matanis Levyoim. But other than that, it's not a Yom Tov. Other than that, they are allowed to make eulogies. They are allowed to fast. I'm putting you can't fast. I'm putting you can't make eulogies. Also, umatanos le'evyoim means that that they give matanis le'evyonim on the advanced date, but let's say what not mishloach manos. What not the Seudah. Okay.
So you read it on Monday and do it.
Mamish, yeah. So some of that we have in the Purim Mashulish that we'll speak out later today. Amar Rebbe Yehuda, Says Rabbi Yehuda, he's referring to the case of these villagers that are allowed to advance sometimes, but the key word is sometimes, at times. That when can they advance? Only if anyways they go to the nearby cities on Mondays and Thursdays. But when you have villagers that they don't gather in the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays, so they're not benefiting by reading the Megillah earlier. As we learned, it was for their advantage. It's only for your advantage when I'm saving you a trip. But I'm saving you, since you're there anyways, chaparain and read the Megillah. If you're not there anyways, so then read it on the right time. They went Monday for two reasons, and the question is which one caused the other one. Torah reading is on Mondays and Thursdays, and the Batei Dinim are open on Mondays and Thursdays. And that actually was a reason for people. Many people don't go to Minyan every day. Begin with Mondays and Thursdays because you're going to hear Kriyas HaTorah. Okay, says the Gemara. Gavaldik. Tana, we learned in a Braisa that Asara Batlanim, the purpose of having 10 people that are batal from Uvde the Chayil is in order for them to be, that's the key word, in the Beis HaKnesses, and not where? Not in the Beis HaMedrash. We're not, God forbid, saying that these people shouldn't learn. B'stama, they sat and learned the whole day. But just the kavana, the purpose of Asara Batlanim, look inside the first line in Rashi under the Gemara. Asara Batlanim sheba Beis HaKnesses shehem b'teilim melachtam, and they are supported from the tzibur. Why? Kedei, second line under the Gemara. Liyois mitzuyim b'tfila b'Beis HaKnesses. Why betfila the Amar Mar? We learned in the tractate of Brachis that Kiv and Shabbat Kodesh Baruch Hu Beis HaKnesses, that when God enters the shul, now God is everywhere, always. Entering the shul means whenever a shul announces the times for prayers, you know who shows up? God, so to say. Ve'einu moitza shama sara, oi gewalt, oi veizmir, what the Gemara says over there. So to prevent that, and not, we're doing this not to be punished. In other words, we want to give Hashem nachas. So that's why you make sure that you have a Asara Batlanim.
Are they paid or is it volunteer?
No, Mishal Tzibur. Mishal Tzibur, they were paid. They were paid to be in shul on time. I can tell like this, that in Brazil, Baruch Hashem, the type of poverty that there is over there, we don't have in LA. There were people from an older generation that were really poor people. And one of the most beautiful, dignified ways of giving them money, one way is paying people to say Kaddish. That's a beautiful thing. So it's a win-win, was for them to be in shul for the minyan. And even if the shul had a minyan, it was a beautiful thing. So they were like, we want to have a minyan of locals. And it's in these countries, at least when I was there, it wasn't that they needed to get paid a lot of money, but they were mamash hungry, and that it was a win-win, beautiful thing. Okay. So let's go. Why is it that when it comes to the Megillah, we never go forward, we only go backwards? Going forward sounds progressive. Going back is better. Going back is you're doing it sooner than later. Oh, because Amar Rab Abba, Amar Shmuel, Amar Krava says V'lo Yaver. V'lo Yaver means never postpone it. Now, for Amar Rab Abba, Amar Shmuel, before we come back to the other four cases in the Mishnah, we're going to quote another statement from the same Amoida. Guys, going into the first wide line, we have to go quicker. Amazing concepts. How do you know that we don't count days to calculate a year? Says Rashi, that if a person makes a vow, let's say wine is prohibited on me for a year. Today is Tes Tevis. Hayoim is Tes Tevis. So when is the year up? Next year, Tes Tevis. And don't counter and say, woo, we learned this in Rosh Hashanah, that maybe a year should mean a solar year, and therefore our Tes Tevis, unless it's a leap year, is going to be around 11 days shorter than a year. We don't look at it that way. When a Jew speaks about a year, you know what he's speaking about? Not days. He's speaking about date. Today is Tes. The year is up by Tes, like when is our birthday? Whenever you were born, a year later, whether it was a shorter year relatively or a longer year, that's the pshat. How do I know that? Because since it says when it comes to the making of the calendar, the words that God uses is lechache hashana, which means that Hashanah is comprised of months, never days. The moment you have 12 months, you got yourself a year. that Chadoshim Atamoinim L'shanim, V'i Atamone Yomim L'shanim. That's number one. Number two, Rabbanon de Kesare say in the name of the same Rab Abba L'choyre. This is the Rab Abba Mashmuya. That what? Ninayin Shem Chashvin Shois L'Chadoshim, something similar but not the same. Rashi says, for example, we can learn this in Gittin, all these types of stipulations, but negative stipulations. A man tells his wife, this is your get. If I don't return with 30 days, his not returning makes the get a get. And he says, a month, same thing. Now, we learned that a month is really a cycle of 29 and a half days. Now, when a month is what we call a deficient month, let's go to Tes Teves, the Tes Shvat. If Teves is deficient, then when you enter Tes Shvat, you are entering the 30th day, but it's not a full 29 and a half days. It's only beginning. We never say for any area in halacha, we need to have the other half a day. A month is a month. Obviously, if the month is going to be a malay, then you need to have more than 29 and a half days. But if you have whatever, even if it's a chaser, you never say it's not full to the hour. We don't say that. A month is a month, the same concept. Again, how do you know that? We're quoting another pasuk in Parshas Baha Aloischa. That's the tragic story of the Asaf Suf, and they desire to have meat every day with the man, and God gave them slav, and it says for 1 month. Ad chodesh yamim. So from there we learn yamim atamachashav lechadashim, v'i atamachashav shois lechadashim. So whenever you have larger units that are comprised of smaller units, that are comprised of even smaller units, we only link the two neighbors. So years are linked with months. Months are linked with days. You understand? And not with the unit that's even lower than it. Okay. Says the Gemara, coming back to our Mishnah, that when it comes to Zman Atzei Kohanim, as we explained, the carbon, or if it falls out on Shabbos, if their date falls out on Shabbos, or the fast day of Tisha B'Av, when it falls out on Shabbos, a carbon chagiga, we'll see that you might not even be allowed to bring it, as we'll see in a moment, because you can't shecht. You're doing many malachas, which when it comes to a communal carbon, you are allowed to do, not a chagiga. So you can't bring it on the right date. Or when Hakeel, when the day after the first day of Sukkot, means the first day of Chol HaMoed, falls out on a Shabbos, there, you can't do it by yom. You never anticipate. You don't advance it. You have to postpone it. The question is why. So let's go case by case by case. Now the Gemara is not going in the Seder. Tisha B'Av. The reason why Tisha B'Av is postponed because Agdumei Purani Yisleim Akadmei. We never advance a commemoration of a calamity. And let me add Hasidic words. Maybe Mashiach will come. Mashiach will come. You're not going to fast. Why are you fasting earlier? Chagiga and Hakeel, which is Korban and the Mitzvah, Mishum da'akati limatas man cheyuvayu. I'll give you a good example. There are certain things that, like, if a person eats matzah now, are they doing a mitzvah? B'chlal not. Even though they're doing the action of eating a matzah. If God did not command me now to do something, I can't fulfill the obligation by doing it early. Not everything works that way. If you have a credit card and you, by mistake, pay them an extra $1,000, so they hold up, they don't give it back to you. But then you have a credit. Certain things you don't have a credit. You can't pay it before you owe it. So you can't do that. Okay, Tanach. And by the way, so the Rishonim say that the same logic goes for carbon ha'etzim. No, they brought a carbon because it became, so to say, a chiyuv. Even though it was a donation, it became a chiyuv. When they brought the wood, they brought a carbon. If they would anticipate the carbon, it will be another donation. But it wouldn't be their chiyuv. And on the shul, a person gave a lot of money, a person gives a lot of tzedakah, and then they make a pledge on the high holidays. So then they say, I want to use that for a credit. That's the sugi here. The shul can say, no, that you gave it before you mechuyev. You brought the carbon early. All right. That's only
All right. So the only mitzvah that we're not ma'acher is Megila because of that pasuk of Elyahu. That's the only pasuk. That's the only mitzvah.
And let me add to that, Tzvika, that was the Daf Beis Amud Aleph, and because the Anshe Knesset Hagoyla from the outset said that the Zman of the Chiyuv really begins before the 14th. That was the whole question. That's why we were looking for the different sources, because if there would not be a Chiyuv, it wouldn't do anything. Wouldn't help. Okay. Tana, we learned, so now this is the Braisa that has to be interpreted. The Braisa says Chagiga. Now, Chagiga we know from our Mishnah. Chagiga means that if the first day of Yom Tov is on Shabbos, L'kula Alma, on Shabbos you don't bring a carbon, so you're ma'acher it. But the Braisa adds V'chol Zman Chagiga. All of the times of the Chagiga, it doesn't make sense. Ma'achrim. So the Gemara asks, Bishlam Chagiga. We understand what these words mean, as we just explained in the Mishnah, that the Mikla B'Shabsif, the first day of any of the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, falls out on Shabbos. One may not bring their carbon chagiga on Shabbos. They're not exempt thereof. They have to bring it. They bring it later. Which is Sunday, Monday, whenever. We'll see later. There's really 7 days of Tashlumin. Elos man. What does these words mean? Approach number one. We're touching upon a sugya that we had in Beitzah. Just like chagiga, everyone holds that you may not bring your chagiga on Shabbos, even though you have to bring a chagiga. So bring it later. What about oilas re'iyah? Oilas re'iyah is, like we mentioned, it's a carbon that we all have to bring on every Yom Tov. But let me tell you the difference between chagiga, I, the owner, get to eat some of it. An oilah, it's fully burnt to God. When are you allowed to, so to say, do malachas on Yom Tov? Remember that we learned that in Beitzah? When it's oichel nefesh. Lochem. The oilah, you're not eating any of it. So there's a machloikas Beishamai and Beisilal whether you are allowed to bring an oilah, not on Shabbos, maybe not even on Yom Tov. Also has to be delayed. So the oilah sre'iyah afilu bi Yom Tov. The zman, it becomes just like the chagiga that what? That ma'achrin. Now, by the way, who holds that you don't bring an oilah, not only not on Shabbos, not even on Yom Tov, you never brought the oilah sri, that's Beishamai. Beisila holds you do bring it. My mani Beishamai, the Tanan, Beishamai yoimrim, neviim shlamim b'Yom Tov, but the ain't soimchen aleihem. But oilah, see, even an oilah re'iyah cannot be brought on Yom Tov. Beisila, they disagree. They hold that you can bring not only shlamim on Yom Tov, guys, not on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. And even an oilah can be brought on Yom Tov. And we learned in Beitzah there limudim. And then the other detail that you are allowed to do smicha. Smicha means that men have to lean on almost all of their karbanis with both of their hands, with all of their might prior to shchita. And leaning on an animal is generally prohibited rabbinically on Yom Tov. Right? Because you might ride the animal and then you might rip off a twig to whip the animal. But here it's a mitzvah. That's the other whole machlokas we had over there. So that's one way of interpreting it. Rava Amar, to interpret this braisa, chagiga, kol zman chagiga. It's when could you postpone the chagiga to? Only during the time of the festival. Ma'achrinon, but after the time of the chagiga. So if a person didn't bring the chagiga on the first day of Pesach, they can bring it during Pesach, during the time of the Yom Tov. And the same thing with Sukkot. So we're going to see that on Sukkot, the Maila is, even though Shmini Atzeres for Psar Kishav is considered the Chag B'fnei Atzmai, but you can bring the Tashlumin of the chagiga of Sukkot even on Shmini Atzeres. Even on Shavuos, right? That's the Chiddush. But that's the meaning. But the point here is that you can only bring it during the times of the holidays, but not after. Yes, David is saying good. Shavuos is an exception, and you have the Shiviyamei Tashlumin that goes until Yud Beis Sivan, but not afterwards. The Tanan, and by the way, many Rishonim hold that, let's go, I didn't bring my chagiga today, Ariel. So now I have another 6 days by Pesach. Is there a inyan to bring it sooner than later? Many people learn in this, but I said no. Once you didn't bring it on the first day, all the days are the same. Now there's another rule. Zrizin magdim al mitzvahs. Why would you delay it? But that's the meaning of this brisa, that the whole Yom Tov is the same. It's like when you have to pay a bill legally. If you paid 7 in the morning or before the date, you paid it on the right date. The whole regel is the tashlumin. And Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, that's the chiddush. When it comes to Sukkot, even Shmini Atzeres is still considered the day of tashlumin. However, Avar regel, and if loy chag means you didn't bring the carbon, ein chai ba'achri yusay. Ein chai ba'achri yusay, my friends, doesn't only mean literally that you're not responsible. It means you can no longer make it up. Now, if you bring another carbon, good for you. You brought a shlamim, but you missed the mitzvah of the shalmei chagiga. Now, Rav Ashi Amar, another way of understanding this brayso, chagiga v'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin means va'afilu atzeres techad yoyim ma'achrin. He goes what we said before, plus. Because before we are saying, David, that you can only make up the chagiga during the zman of the chagiga. But then one might think there is one of the 3 Yom Tovim that only has 1 day, Shavuos. So the kol zman chagiga is actually alluding, being meramis, that you always have a time to make up. Even when it's not a holiday. As we learned all these dinim before. The Tanan, that moedim, Rashi, if you want to push it, it's getting late. Rashi, 4 lines on the bottom, goes through a machlokes that we're going to have. We had this in Beitza, we're going to have this again in Chagiga between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but they both agree, she'imchal atzeres liyas b'Shabbos. Once everyone agrees that on Shabbos, you can't bring these karbanos. On Yom Tov, there's a machlokes. Now, atzeres only has 1 day. So if it falls on Shabbos, the next day becomes a day that everyone is slaughtering their karbanis. They called it Yom Tevuach. Yom Tevuach Achar Shabbos. Why? Because we're going to learn psukim for that Shavuos has, like Pesach, a 7 days of Tashlum. And by the way, until today, on Sivan, we don't say Tachnun until Yud Beis. Va'ad Bechlal, because these are days of Tashlum. Guys, with this, we finished interpreting this enigmatic brayso. And now we're going to come back to some dinim of Purim and some dinim of Tisha B'Av, the fascinating Gemara. Amar Rebbe Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. These are Amoraim. Rebbe, this is Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Number 1, Chiddush, not on Netiyah Bepurim. He planted a shoot on Purim. Now you're going to say, big deal. It's a big deal. We spoke this out in the intro. There was a period of time that there was a Havamina to prohibit work. We're speaking about like work day on Purim. It should be like a Shabbos. On Shabbos, you can't plant. On Yom Tov, you can't plant. Rebbe planted a tree on Purim, number 1, that Hayam base. And number 2, another Chiddush, V'rachatz b'kroino shel tzipoiri, v'shiva asa b'Tammuz. On the 17th of Tammuz, he bathed. The word Koren means a carriage. The word, where do you have carriages? In the marketplace. An expression. He bathed in the marketplace. He bathed in the marketplace. He bathed in a place where everyone knew he took a bath. What's the chiddush? So if you remember, guys, we learned this together in Rosh Hashanah. So let's look inside the top Tosfos. He reminds us, there was a period of time where the stringencies regarding the 5 inuyim, including not bathing, that we practice on Yom Kippur, that we practice on Tisha B'Av, there was a time that they practiced it during the 17th of Tammuz also. Oh, so says Tosfos, first of all, v'lav dafka b'kroino, in a wagon, it means that he bathed b'feresya. Asks Tosfos him, why do we say that Rebbe bathed? In other words, he did not subscribe to the stringencies of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. When you learn the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, you might understand that during the periods of time, even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, if there wasn't the religious decrees against the Jewish people, mashma, that we were not obligated to fast Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. Rebbe bathed, Rebbe should have eaten. So Tosfos clarifies, and we spoke this out when we learned there in Rosh Hashanah, that even though, guys, during the times of the Second Temple, Shiva Asa B'Tammuz was not a fast day. Tisha B'Av was reinstated. The other fast days, there was a certain period of time where it was up to the locality. Rebbe lived at a time, don't forget, Rebbe was close with Antoninus. Rebbe was good with the Roman government. There wasn't religious persecution during that little period of time. Nevertheless, there was, prior to the life of Rebbe, everyone already undertook to at least fast on Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, not to start the night prior. We don't make a 25-hour fast. The other Inuyim, we don't care. That's the pshat. Rebbe bathed. He took a bath. The chitza.
Rebbe was before the Churban.
Rebbe was after the Churban. Rebbe was around 170 years after the Churban or something like that, or 120, 130 years. So there was a time we learned that if there wasn't was when we reinstated Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, it wasn't like Tisha B'Av. It depends on the situation of the Jews and Galus. So Tosfos clarifies, it wasn't that after a certain period of time, there was even an option not to fast. That's not an option. Fast, you have to fast. But the Rebbe wanted to make sure that you're not mechuyev to afflict yourself with the other afflictions, and you are allowed to bathe. And now the second line back in the Gemara, Bikesh la'akar Tisha B'Av. You know what these words sound like? Rebbe wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. Sounds like mamish. But v'lo yhoidoloi. Second Tosfos. Even according to the initial understanding, that will be clarified. How can Rebbe want to uproot Tisha B'Av? Didn't we learn, guys? We just learned this at the end of Tainus. That and furthermore, Tosfos says there's a rule. The rule is that once Beis Din makes a takana, a latter Beis Din cannot undo it unless they are greater b'chacham or b'minyan. So what do you mean that the Rebbe wanted to uproot it? So says Tosfos another word. Here we go again, connected to the first Tosfos. Even in the Havamina, fasting, what do we know nowadays? Forget about Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. What's a fast day? Only from the morning until the night. What affliction are we mechuyev? Now, Asara B'Tevis, B'Ashgacha Pratis is tomorrow. What's the Asara B'Tevis? It begins in the morning, and the Isur is not to eat and drink. This is what the Havamina was. Rebbe wanted that Tisha B'Av should not be like Yom Kippur. Tisha B'Av should only be like Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. We're going to see that's not what he meant, but that was the Havamina. And that's something that Rebbe had the power to do. Rebbe had the power to do that, going back to the Gemara that we quoted in Rosh Hashanah, because after the second temple was built, we for sure, for certain times during the second temple era, we did not fast on Tisha B'Av. And after the Churban Abayis, they didn't fix it so kavua. They fixed it that until Moshiach, you have to fast somewhat. You have to have some affliction. But how much? It wasn't clear then. And Rebbe really would have the power to say, you know what? It should be like Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. That's the Havamina. However, Amar Lefan of Rab Abba Bar Zavda told Rabbi Lazar that Rebbe means Rabbi Lazar. I disagree with you. That's not what Rebbe wanted to do. The only leniency that Rebbe wanted to bring about was Ella Tisha B'Av Shechaliyas b'Shabbos, that whenever Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. And what happens now? We don't fast on Shabbos. V'dachinuhu la'achar Shabbos. It's pushed off. Rebbe wanted to say that in such a year, don't fast at all. However, the Chachamim, at the era of Rebbe, and Rabbi Lazar was so happy that he heard that correction from Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda that he told him, he read the pasuk, that Toivim Hashnayim ino echad, that two is better than one. And that means that when you learn Torah, the whole attitude, even though for many years Rabbi Lazar had that version, and there are questions on this, and we have a Tosfos to try to explain it. When he heard this, he knew that's taka what it was. And Mikan again, the importance of learning in a group. And we do this even, we're not comparing ourselves to those giants, but we constantly correct each other. There's nothing like learning in a group. Okay, mamish. So that we clarified that. Now we're going to the first statement we had on the bottom of Daf, hey, that the Rebbe planted a tree on Purim. Ferek Gemara, this is the sugya. Are you allowed to work on Purim? You cannot work on Purim. The Rebbe, heichi not on Purim. How is he allowed to plant a shud? V'hatani, Rabbi Yosef, we're quoting words in the Megila. What does it say in the Megila? That the days of Purim are simcha. Simcha in English is gladness. Mishnah means feasting. Feasting also including drinking. And v'yomtiv. What does yomtiv mean? If you're going to say Yom Tov just means to be glad and to feast, it already says Mishnah v'Simcha. Yom Tov must mean that you're not allowed to work. You know, we take it for granted because we are Baruch Hashem observant Jews. We know that you can work on Purim. We can drive a car on Purim. But read the Megillah. What does Yom Tov mean? And Rabbi Yosef said, the word simcha means malamed shasurim behesped. That even if someone is going to be buried, you can't make a eulogy because a eulogy takes away from joy. Mishnah means you may not fast. Sha'asur b'tainis. And the words in the Megillah of Yom Tov mean sha'asur b'asiyas melach. It's forbidden to work on Purim. Yom Tov. So Amar Rebbe, Ella answers the Gemara, I'll tell you what it must have meant. Rebbe lived in a city where Purim was celebrated on the 14th. When did Rebbe plant a tree? On the 15th. So you can use the word Bipuraya, but it's not Mamish Purim. No, nicht any. But why not? Now we're going to go into the whole sugi of cities. This is going to lead us into a lot of Agadata tomorrow. From this, Rebbe lived in Tiberia. Rebbe wasn't buried there, but the Rebbe lived in Tiberia. And the Tiberia, now we're taking this as a given. Every line here is controversial. The Tiberia was a city that was surrounded with the wall from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Let me tell you something. Not exactly. Why not exactly? Tiberia was a protected city from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Yeah. It had a wall from three sides. From one side, it didn't have a wall. From which side didn't it have a wall? From the Kinneres. The question is that considered a wall for this? That will be a very interesting discussion. What's the goal of having a city surrounded with a wall? Protection? The Kinneret protects. Or you want it to be a way for people should not see in. You can see in. We'll speak about this more in a moment. Okay. Hello. So first of all, he lived in Tiberia. So Rebbe's Purim was on the 15th. So the Gemara says, fine, you got me. I'll go backwards now. Rebbe lived in a city where they celebrated Purim on the 15th. When did Rebbe plant a tree? Only on the 14th. Says the Gemara, can be. No, how can you say that Rebbe knew that Tiberia is a city in which you have to celebrate the 15th, not the 14th? Many years before Rebbe. Rebbe was a king. Man Malka Rabbanan. There was an actual king. And that was Chizkiah HaMelech. Chizkiah read the Megillah in Tiberia both on the 14th and on the 15th. You know why? Because the king Chizkiah had a doubt, halachically, if Tiberia is considered a walled city from the days of Yeshua ben Nun or not. So, based on the presumption that on Purim you may not work, meaning also you can't plant a tree. You can't give a teretz, Rebbe was in Tiberia, so he planted it on the 14th. Rebbe should have kept both days, and misafek not have worked on neither day. So the Gemara says, Chizkiah had a doubt, and Rebbe had no doubt. Don't tell me that Rebbe was sure that what? That Tiberia is considered a city that is mukafes chaymim imayis Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore you only keep it on the 15th. Mishadei, it says in Megillas Tainis, guys, we learned this in Masechtas Tainis. Megillas Tainis recorded all of the minor holidays in which you may not make a eulogy and you may not fast. Let me tell you one holiday that l'chu'ura should not have been recorded in Megillas Tainis. Purim. Why? Because Purim is recorded in Scripture. In Megillas Tainis, you don't have Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. The problem is that the days of Purim are recorded in Megillas Tainis. Why? We had that question in Masechtas Tainis. It says in Megillas Tainis, Es Yoim Arba Asar, Es Yoim Chamish Asar, Yoimei Puraya Inon. These are days of Purim. That you may not eulogize. And the question is, why B'chlal do you have to write it to Megillas Tainis? And on that, Rabbi answered, Loi. No, it's not a question. It's needed. That eulogizing and fasting, no matter where you live, whether you lived in a walled city, whether you lived in an unwalled city, whether you're going to read the Megillah on the 14th, whether you can read it on the 15th, the Isurim, eulogizing and fasting may not be done regardless on neither day. And the kasha is lechoura, based on our presumption that you may not do malacha, also it should be an isur on both days. Says the Gemara, no. That Hanimili, Rava's statement is only correct concerning Hesped and Tainus. But as far as malacha, no, you are only usher to do malacha on your day of Purim. So all of this is trying to farenfer. So Rebbe celebrated Purim on the 15th. Rebbe knew for sure that Tiberia is a ir that has a status of a walled city. And on the 14th, he planted a tree. The Gemara says, Vesuloi, no. only Isra Malach on one day. It's not true. Rav Chaz Yalahu Gavra Tahava Koshadi Kisna Bipuraya. He saw a man. Now we're going now to Babylonia, to Surah, who was planting flax on Purim. He was working. Ulataya V'loit Samach. Rav cursed him, and one of the consequences was that the flax that he planted, Bechlal did not sprout, did not grow. L'tzamach kisnei, ketone. So the Gemara says, well, what kind of question is that? Hold on. That he planted it on the day of, let's say, Surah. Surah is the day of the 14th. Hassan bar Yoimuhu. Okay, what's even the Havamina? That's a question. Rabba bereided Rabba Amar, afilu tema was like the Bach, biyoima have. Oh, I will tell you that Rebbe planted the tree on whatever day he was keeping Purim. And you're right, you, Rav Yosef, you're right that initially when the Chachamim enacted Purim, they wanted it to be Yemei Mishta, Simcha, and Yom Tov. You know what? People didn't accept the Yom Tov part. And whenever the rabbis make a decree, part of that, is it binding? It's up to the people's acceptance of it. When God makes a law, God made a law. We got to keep it. When the rabbinate makes a law, it's very important rules. If no one kept like Ezra, made a takana, Tefilla Ezra, person has a seminal omission, kosher, a married man, can't say Shema, can't say Shemana Esrei, can't learn Torah before he goes to the mikveh. People didn't accept it. It was not binding. Didn't chap. So initially, Hesped V'Tainis, Kabila Elayu, everyone accepted the restrictions not to eulogize, not to fast. And therefore, that's the point of Rebbe. Rebbe wanted to show everyone that you are allowed to work. Okay. Now, the Meikara, the proof is, first it says in the Megila, and that's the pasuk that Rabbi Yosef interpreted, Simcha, Umishta, V'Yom Tov. Who's a Baal Koira? Later in the Megillah it says, Lasas Oisam. Oisam goes to the 14th and the 15th. Yemei Mishta V'Simcha. And here, V'ilu Yom Tov Loik Siv, we have one big problem. The big problem is, if you're telling me that already in the days of Rebbe, Tanoim, it was clear that it's not a day of Isra Malacha, why did Rav say negative, say Lataya on someone who planted flax? Ella Rav, my time of Lataya lo Gavra. So the Gemara answers, even though you were not bound by the law, but many communities have had a minig not to work. These are very important concepts. So if you live in a locality where the minig is not to work, you may not break the minig. If there are things that me'ikirad in our mutter, it's only v'achedim l'hagabem isur, but other people, meaning people in your community, took upon themselves this beyond the letter of the law, then for you it is forbidden. The Rebbe, in the place of Rebbe in Tiberia, people worked. Over there in the city of Rav, people did not work. The Iba Yisema, or maybe even in Tiberia, the minig was not to work. So why was Rebbe allowed to plant a shoot on Purim? That's unique. The Rebbe planted a type of plant which is connected to a simcha, which may be done. Now, guys, if the Yom Tov would have chapped, it doesn't make a difference. You can't do anything. There's no heter. If it's only the minig not to work, then there are exceptions. And Kidvit Tanan, guys, we had this in kindness in a different context. That's if there's no rain, and we did the 3, and we did the 3, right? And we did the 7, and it's still not raining. So the Mishnah says that so that's it. There's no more kindness tzibur. But you have to diminish. You have to diminish the building and the planting. And then we learned there in kindness a Tana, a Braisa that limited those restrictions. A Tana law, what may not be built, a binyan of simcha. What may not be planted, if it's still not raining, Netiyoy shel simcha, the first white line, a plant connected to a simcha. And we learned over there, what's a binyan shel simcha? People used to build a start-up home in which they actually celebrated the 7 days of wedding. That's something that you may not do. What's called the plant connected to a simcha? What's avur niki shel malachim? If you remember when we began Masech the Tainus, we pointed out that it's mashma that the author of Rashi and Tainus is not Rashi. It's not Rab Shlomi Yitzchaki. It was one of his students. Here's another proof. Because here Rashi says avur niki. I'm reading inside the Rashi. Rashi is like a middle of the Amid. It's a type of tree that was used to create a shaded area for the summer in which the wealthy people, the kings, would go and spend their afternoons, right? Indoors started to get too hot. You go outdoors in a shade. That's called avur nikisha malachim. Malachim means that kings used to build these plants. You have these trellises here in LA, and you have these beautiful plants that create shade. That's what Rashi writes over here. I want to read Nachamol, so to say, Rashi, Tainus Daf Yudalod Amud Beis, and avur nikisha malachim says Rashi over there, the first line under the Gemara. So it's not Rashi, it's a stira. He says that when a king had a child, an infant, they would plant a tree. And when would they cut the tree down? When that child would be throned, they would create a throne from that tree. Stop, you see, it's a whole different shot. Not the same author. Okay, back over here. Says the Gemara Gufa. Let's start learning this whole sugya about cities. Chizkiah, Kari B'Tveria, Chizkiah, King Chizkiah, who obviously spent Purims, whether he lived there, I don't know enough history, or when he was there often, he was not certain what date do you celebrate Purim in Tveria. And therefore, to cover his bases, he read the Megillah both on the 14th and on the 15th, because Misapkale, he had a suffix, Imo Kefes Chema, Mi'imais Yeshua Benoni, Be'iloi. Frag the Gemara, how can you have such a doubt? How can it be about regarding Tveria? For Haksiv, it says in Yehoshua, Sefer Yehoshua, that when he entered the land of Israel, Va'arei Miftzar, so the Torah records fortress cities. Now, how do you type fortress? A fortress city, Miftzar, meant a city that without God's help can't penetrate. I mean, a walled city. And what do we mention? Listen to the names of the cities. Sidim, another city called Seir, a city called Hamas, a city called Rakas, and a city called Kinneres. Before you jump, let me tell you, Kinneres is not Tveria. We're going to have, we'll see how far we can get. We're going to see whether Rakas is Tveria. Okay. And V'kaim Elon, Rakas is Tveria. So if it says in Yeshua that Rakas Tveria is a fortress city, why is it a fortress? Because it was surrounded with a wall. So the Gemara answers, you're right, there was a physical wall, the Chad Gisa Shura. There was a wall from three sides. But from one side, what you call this a natural barrier. That's called the Chad Gisa Shura. Shura means a wall, but it wasn't a wall. The Yama. It was the Kinneres that formed the wall. And this is a very deep concept. Let's speak it out more in a moment. That let's go backwards. If it's not a wall, and where else do you find in the Torah a concept of a walled city? And a walled city means a wall. The Tanya, we keep on quoting this in Parshas Bahar. If a person owns a home in a walled city, and there are unique laws that if you sell that home, you can redeem it the first year. You can never redeem it afterwards. So when it says in the Chumash, Asher loy chaymer, that to that city there is a wall. So the Chazal tell us, V'loy shur igar, and not a wall of houses. It needs to have an independent wall around the city in Bahar. Another din, when it says in Bahar the word saviv, what does saviv mean? Arum and arum. Prat l'Tveria. Prat l'Tveria. Even though Tveria is a protected city, so it can be called a fortress city, but since Yama Chaymasa, it's not considered a walled city regarding the laws of selling a home in a walled city. So why did Chizkiah have a doubt? So the Gemara says, no, every din doesn't have to go on the same track. Explains the Gemara. What do we find? Where do we find the concept of wall? We mentioned this in the beginning of the Masechta. It's more how the Torah calls, how Esther calls the unwalled city. It's called Perazim, right? Perazim and Mukafim. How do you interpret that? Perazim umukafim d'chsevigam mikra Megila. What makes a city Perazim? What makes a city Mukafim is the key criteria. Dahani miglu. Perazim means exposed. Perazim means revealed. And vahani loy. Miglu, is it about exposed or not exposed? Now, you can see into the city across the Kinneret from the other side. So vahani nami migli. And if it's exposed, then it's going to be considered Perazim. Oidilma mishum dahani migani. It's about being protected. Vahani loy migani. And vahai nami migna. It's protected. So that was the suffix. Umishumachim esapkale. B'chlal, you have this concept, exposed and protected. Normally, beruchnius. What did we also learn in Tainus? That that there's a special bracha dafka on the things that are hidden from the eye. It's normally, if something is exposed, it's less protected. It doesn't have such a big bracha. But there are times that something can be exposed and still be protected. That's Teveria. It's like a unique concept. Something can be seen, but it's still protected. And that was the doubt that Chizkiah had. We're going to stop over here. And God's willing to be continued.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
We were behind.
Who was the real Rashi? Tainus or Megila? Rabbi, who's the real Rashi? Tainus or Megila?
Huh?
Who's the real Rashi? Masachet Ta'anit or Megila?
No, Megila. For sure. Yeah. In Tainus, he keeps on writing, Mipi Moidi. We also said that Tosfos in Tainus is acting like Rashi. If there was Rashi, he wouldn't interpret. He would just do his Tosfos questions, status.